superintendent at its May 20th meeting. A Jacksonville firefighter who died last year is among 70 others who will be honored this weekend during the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial Weekend in Maryland. 44-year-old engineer Heath O'Shea died on April 13th last year after suffering a medical emergency at Station 54 on Phillips Highway. His name was added in December to the Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department's memorial wall. The National Fallen Firefighters Foundation's annual tribute will honor the 70 firefighters who died in the line of duty in 2024, plus others whose deaths occurred in previous years. We have the chance for some rain later on this morning and through the afternoon here in Northeast Florida. Scattered showers and storms are expected to move onshore. Highs today will be in the lower 80s at the beaches, upper 80s for the inland areas.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Connect. Today, what would a proposed clawback of $1 billion in federal funding mean for public broadcasters, including this station? We break down the money matrix and take your calls and questions. Later in the program, as hundreds of law enforcement officers begin executing immigration law, we look at how the landscape is changing for Florida residents and migrants. But first, a question we get a lot these days here at the station is, what would Trump-era cuts mean to public media? To help us answer, we're bringing in WJCT President and CEO David McGowan. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Let's start, if we can, by explaining why we're talking about the possibility of cuts in the first place.
Sure. So we have an understanding that there will be delivered sometime this week, but most likely today, a rescission request from the Office of Management and Budget to the Congress. And what that rescission request will entail, we understand, is a clawback of funds that have already been appropriated in the federal budget for the next 2 years for essentially all public media funding. So that's why we're here talking about it today, because that's a very important day when that happens, and it's important that everyone understand what's at stake.
And so Congress is back in session today after a 2-week recess. And we know that, some news outlets have reported on this. The New York Times, Politico, NPR has spoken, to its station leadership about this happening. What exactly are you expecting? I mentioned $1 billion. What does that
Sure.
signify?
Well, the annual appropriation to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is $535 million every year. As I mentioned, the rescission request is for funds that have already been appropriated, and that's because public media funding is provided on a 2-year forward funding basis. And that's because in the original Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, Congress foresaw that this funding could be subject to political pressure. And so it designed really a unique system. We are virtually unique in the federal budget process in having this 2-year forward funding provision. And so what that means is, in the federal budget today, there is funding provided for public media in fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. In fact, in the continuing resolution that was recently passed by Congress, federal funding was included for those years. And so this rescission request, when it comes from the Office of Management and Budget, will go back and essentially ask Congress to claw back or rescind those funds that have already been appropriated. The way it works is this is a process that is in the law, so it's a fully legal process that the administration is engaged in. They will ask Congress to vote on this package of rescission cuts, and Congress has 45 days to act. It will go first to the House of Representatives, and if the rescission request is passed there, it will move on to the United States Senate.
And this is just a simple majority that is needed?
It's a simple majority.
Okay. So if they don't approve this within 45 days, this rescission request from the Office of Management and Budget, what happens?
If no action is taken, then the budget remains as it is today, which means that the monies for fiscal 26 and fiscal 27 will be included in the federal budget. However, we're engaged now in the budget process. There are 2 other processes that will be unfolding this year, both the reconciliation process and then the actual budget process. And that will be also, I'm sure, an issue that Congress will take up. But if Congress decides not to include public media funding in that process, that will mean essentially that funds will be withdrawn in fiscal year 28.
Right. And so the thing about this clawback, I mean, this is, like any nonprofit, there's a lot of planning that goes into expected funds that are, in the pipeline. What does it mean, practically speaking, to claw back money that's been appropriated and that these stations believe is coming or is in their,
So I think it's important to understand how federal money works in the public media system. It's a very complicated system, and as some of our listeners may recognize, we are a really highly interdependent federation of organizations across the country that depend on each other for a lot of different kinds of services. So, as an example, the public media funding that is provided by Congress is actually provided in four different buckets. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the largest one of those at $535 million. But there are other funds that also benefit public broadcasting, such as the Interconnection System, which is funded by Congress, which provides a whole bunch of public safety services. The Next Generation Warning System is actually a grant program provided through FEMA. The Ready to Learn program, which provides educational resources and educational programming, is actually funding that's provided through the Department of Education. So there are a variety of funding programs that benefit public media, but the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is the main one. That's $535 million every year. And of those funds, and forgive me because I know this is already getting complicated, but of those funds, about 70% go directly to local public media organizations, organizations just like WJCT, all across the country. Of course, I say just like WJCT, but public media organizations are very different across the country. Some are radio only, some are TV only, some, like us, are both radio and television and digital and all the rest. But 70% of them, of those funds, go directly to stations. Other funds go to support other services, such as direct grants to television producers, direct grants to radio producers. So we depend on that, of course, as well. So when you talk about the money that goes directly to a public media organization like us, you have to recognize that that's only part of the value that we get from the federal appropriation.
because some of that money is going to create programming that we air.
Exactly.
Right. So people often ask us, and I've been hearing it a lot lately, I'm sure you have too, kind of what portion of WJCT's budget is coming from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting? How much would this impact the station? And those are actually kind of two different questions.
They are. I mean, if you, again, the money that comes directly to us represents, again, depending on the year and depending a little bit on how you count it, somewhere around 15% of our annual operating budget comes directly from that grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It's called a community service grant, and it comes every year to us. But because we're so interdependent on other, whether it's music rights that are cleared by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and those rights are paid for directly by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or the kids programming that is funded directly, either partially through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting or through the Ready to Learn service, or, and this is something, again, that's a little bit hard to understand, but there are hundreds of public media organizations across the country that receive this funding. Some of them are more highly dependent than WJCT is on that federal grant, that federal community service grant. If those stations are unable to continue to operate, they will shrink the pool of stations that pay for programming from, for example, PBS on the television side and NPR on the radio side. And when that pool of organizations shrinks, that's actually funding those organizations, well, that's a problem because the burden gets passed on to those of us still remaining. So as I said, it's very difficult to really forecast exactly what will happen if the federal funding for public media is clawed back. But I think we can say that the impact is going to be very significant and potentially catastrophic, especially for public media organizations in rural areas, for example, where you just don't have the population base to kind of build the public-private partnership in the same way that we have at WJCT.
If you're just joining us, we're talking with WJCT President and CEO David McGowan about the possibility of federal cuts to public broadcasting and what the impact might be. And we also want to hear from you since public media is your resource as well. You can reach us at 904-549-2937 with any questions. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. We have a message from John on Facebook, and he says, with all the platforms in independent media as well as commercial media sources, why would we need to spend public dollars on public media? He says it's a relic of the past that has a liberal slant and often borders on propaganda. Um, and I'd like to ask you about that, but I also want to notice that this is coming kind of on the heels since some very bruising hearings that PBS and NPR sat through,
Right.
that were part of the government, the House Government Oversight Committee on Delivering Government Efficiency, kind of the DOGE function. And I want to listen to a little sound from that because the chair of that committee, that subcommittee, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and her colleague James Comer both had sort of similar critiques of NPR and PBS. Let's listen to what they had to say.
NPR and PBS have increasingly become radical left-wing echo chambers for a narrow audience. PBS News is not just left-leaning, but it is actively uses taxpayer funds to push some of the most radical left positions.
I don't even recognize the station anymore.
So as we said, that's Marjorie Taylor Greene, James Comer talking at that hearing. And there were sentiments among their Republican colleagues, very similar to that throughout the hearing.
Sure, and I want to address both of the points that were made by the person who wrote in. One of them is that we have no reason to exist anymore in a media environment that has loads and loads of platforms. And I think I understand that perception, but I think it's really important to understand what makes public media unique. And one of the things that I believe firmly about the federal funding for public media is that it's actually what makes us public. We have certain responsibilities that come with that funding. One of them is actually to provide service across the entire country, including a lot of places where media services are just unviable, particularly broadcast media services that depend on reaching population. Public media stations and services reach 99.7% of the American population. And that's because we operate without commercial imperatives. We operate with one thing in mind, and that is serving everybody. And all of those services that are provided over broadcast platforms, and most of them that are provided through digital platforms, are offered free of charge. So that public component and the obligations that we have that come with that really are dependent on federal funding. The other question, of course, that's raised is the one of bias, and that's one also that we have heard a lot. It's interesting because over the years that I've been involved in public media, most of those charges have typically been leveled at NPR, much less so at PBS. And so I find it interesting that at the hearings, Marjorie Taylor Greene in particular raised several points about public television broadcasting and its radical nature. I just don't believe that to be true. I think certainly there's a certain way in which bias is in the eye of the beholder. I know for a fact that Catherine Marr, the new president of NPR, although she has said some things in the past critical of President Trump before she joined NPR, I believe she has actually put in place a variety of systems editorially that enable us to more effectively guard against bias in the broadcasting. It's a tricky thing. There's no question that there are times, and I think NPR has admitted times, when it has made mistakes. Every editorial organization makes mistakes. We make mistakes here. We do our best to correct them quickly when we make them and to own up to them. But I think when you think about how important it is to have a fact-based, rigorously researched news provider in this media ecosystem that we operate in today, I feel really strongly that NPR and PBS both are doing their absolute best to provide us as a local operator with programming that we can count on to be fair.
We have a call from Sally in Springfield. Oh, Got a call from Sally in Springfield. I don't know if it's coming through yet. Okay. I'm sorry. I guess that went away. I do want to take a listen because you mentioned Catherine Maher. She's the CEO and president of NPR. She also was joined by Paula Kerger, who's the president and CEO of PBS. They both spoke at those hearings. Let's just take a little listen to what they had to say.
There's nothing more American than PBS. Our educational programming is backed by scores of research studies showing that our programs like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and Super Y help kids develop essential skills like reading, math, and problem solving.
Recent independent polling found that more than 60% of all Americans and more than half of Republicans trust public broadcasting to deliver fact-based news. It correlates with higher rates of civic engagement, greater civic cohesion, and economic advantages, such as better municipal bond ratings.
You know, there are a lot of programs that people are familiar with on NPR and PBS, Sesame Street, chief among them, but Fresh Air and Nova, Morning Edition. These are popular programs. And yet we know that there's been a lot of popular programs that have been cut via executive order under this administration, everything from, state parks to NOAA, possibly even the National Gallery of Art now. So that is not going to insulate PBS and NPR because people like Elmo, right?
Well, I think that may be true, but it's also true that we have endured attacks on public media funding in the past. This is a program that has enjoyed decades of bipartisan support in both houses of Congress. And in the past, when there have been efforts to curtail funding or to eliminate it, the reason that funding has remained is because the population has said, no, we want it. This is important to us. It costs us $1.60 for each of us as Americans to support this program, and we find it valuable in our lives. We think that the education programming that is provided through PBS is invaluable, and it's unique. 72% of all children 2 to 8 years old across the country use public media programming to supplement their education. Less than half of kids are in preschools. We need this kind of support, and we need this kind of programming in order to remain the kind of society that we want to be. And I think the public has generally recognized that and come out and support it. And that's actually what we're asking people to do right now. Now is the time to let your voice be heard. If you are one of those who is listening to this program who says, what public media does across the country, what WJCT public media does right here in Northeast Florida is valuable, and it needs federal support in order to keep it whole or to keep it going and progressing, go to wjct.org/protect, and you can find the way very easily to just, it takes you 5 seconds really to just contact your member of Congress and let them know that.
We do have now Sally from Springfield on the line. Good morning. Sally, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to point out I definitely support National Public Radio, and there's many people who are low income who can't afford to get cable TV. So having a radio station that you can listen to a diverse number of programs, First Coast Connect, Marketplace, Fresh Air, is really important to keep low-income grown-ups in touch with what's going on with the world. And to just comment on the objections that people may have that they don't want to support a liberal program. If you buy a cable news package and you really don't want to watch Fox News, you're still paying for it. So you are also supporting a program. We all have to chip in for things that we might not really like, and that's the beauty of America.
Thanks, Sally. I appreciate your call. David, I'm curious your thoughts about that. And then just, I think I would like to know a little bit more about why you think, non-commercial programming matters, how that is different from commercial programming.
Well, I think, again, we have one mission in mind, and that is to serve the citizens here in our region in order to make the quality of life better for everyone. And I think the opportunity to operate in the public interest is something that we all take here, all of us who work here, very seriously. And it's really important to have media operations that don't really think about as their primary motivation serving advertisers. That is, I think, what has led to, in large part, the bifurcation of media that we see today, where we have MSNBC on one side and Fox News on the other. It would have been very easy for NPR or any public media organization to sort of say, well, there's more underwriting if we really serve a specific audience very directly by political persuasion. We know that that's not what we're here for. We're here to create a bipartisan, completely objective, fair view of the world and to try to incorporate that into everything we do. And that's very different than the commercial environment that we live in today.
We've got a call from Philip on the west side. Good morning, Philip. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'd like to make a comment, and it's strictly that NPR and PBS broadcast nothing but the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thanks, Philip. Appreciate your call. We've got a call from William on the south side. Good morning, William. Go ahead.
Good morning. How are y'all doing today?
Terrific. Thank you.
This is a great conversation because I think since the first administration with Trump, there was efforts to silence PBS and NPR, which were not successful, but they did cause a lot of problems. My question is, who in the federal government, and you may have addressed this already, is supporting PBS and NPR in a way that their funding is not cut or deviated? Because if you look at the historical aspects, and I hate saying this word, of dictatorships, they wanted to silence public radio. They wanted to silence the newspapers. So we see another repeat of history in this attempt against the services that PBS and NPR provide. So who in the government that you can say or talk about is actually in support of these efforts to keep these resources we really need? Thank you for your comments.
Thanks, William. I'm curious at your answer to that, and then just also kind of what we know about the public's level of support for public broadcasting.
Sure. So I want to emphasize again, and thank you for the question, that we have enjoyed bipartisan support, both here in Florida at the state level, the state legislature, and in the federal government. And that support is in Congress, and that's what we are dependent on now is a congressional vote. I think, we can clearly see that the environment now on the Hill is different than it's been in the past. And so we understand that the Republican caucus is very interested in serving the agenda of the current Trump administration. And so we know that there will be pressure on Congress that there perhaps has not been in quite the same way before. But we do have advocates in Congress, just as we have in the state house here. And here in Florida, we've had a Republican-controlled legislature for some time, and yet they have continued to support state funding for public media. It's not as large as the federal funding, but it's still significant to us. And that's really important. I think it's important to recognize that both sides of the aisle have recognized the value that we provide. Of course, folks sometimes get upset about news stories that they may hear that they feel they disagree with for whatever reason. And we understand that. That's part of the news business. Every news organization that I've been a part of, and I've had experience both, in commercial news organizations and now in public media news organizations. And no matter what you do, you're always subject to folks who may disagree, may think that you treated them unfairly, whatever that case may be. But we're here for one purpose, and that is to serve. And when we hear folks say that they feel we've made an error, we make sure that we go back and either correct it or defend it, depending on what the case may be. With regard to what the public thinks, I think someone mentioned earlier that the public overwhelmingly supports federal funding for public media, more than 62% in a very recent Pew Research Center poll supported public media, including a majority of Republicans, including a majority of Trump voters. So there is widespread support for it. We hope that can carry the day in Congress.
Got a few emails I want to run through. Lori on Facebook, well, not an email, but on Facebook. NPR is the one place to get news that isn't trying to win ratings and sensationalize everything. Truly appreciate NPR for news. Also, an email from Ross who says cutting NPR's funding would be a mistake. But as a compromise, something needs to change about its obvious partisan bias. Does WJCT currently employ anyone who voted for Trump? At the very least, outlets that receive public funding should be forced to abide by something resembling the old FCC fairness doctrine. Otherwise, Republicans' tax dollars are just being used to bash them.
Well, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, I don't know what people's voting histories are here at WJCT. We don't ask people what their voting records are. But I do think that there is an important obligation to fairness, and that the fairness doctrine, has merits, and that we need to make sure that we are doubling down on our efforts to live what we say we are, which is a nonpartisan, fact-based, objective, and fair news organization. And I know, for example, that NPR has doubled down on those efforts. As I mentioned, Catherine Marr has put in place a new set of editorial procedures, which are designed really to ensure that everything that gets onto the air has an impartial review, and is subject to those kinds of procedures that are in place to ensure fairness. Fairness is really the ultimate objective, I think. Not everyone can agree with everything, but if you can look back and say, was that a fair way of handling a story? Was that a fair way of handling an issue? I think that's what we strive for.
How has the changing media landscape impacted perceptions of public media? I mean, there was a time when you mentioned, the MSNBCs, the Fox Newses, those didn't exist in
Right.
any, significant form, and they're so prevalent now. Has it changed how people view bias? Has it changed how people kind of the metric that they use to judge something like public broadcasting?
Well, I think the challenge that we have, and that we all have as citizens here, is that we're increasingly reading, watching, listening to news that tends to be what we agree with. And that is very much a feature of our modern media landscape. We try to bring people views that they may not agree with. We try to bring people views from all over the political spectrum. I would say that one thing, and I do want to point this out because I think it is a feature of really very modern, really last couple of years in our media world, is that in order to present all of these views, we really need people to cooperate in the sense that they can appear on our air, on your show, for example, and make their views known, whether those are Republican leaders in our city, in our state, across the country. We need their participation. We need them to go on the air, be interviewed, and explain why they're doing what they're doing. When they don't do that, it leads to the perception that we are only representing one side, even though I can assure you, and you know better than I do, Ann, that we make those invitations every single day. We try to get those folks on our air every single day. But if they choose to ignore us because they believe that they can reach their public, their audience, their supporters through more partisan outlets, it really destroys the fabric of really the sort of outlets like ourselves. And so that's something that we're working hard to counter, and we would ask that everyone respect who we are and what the mission we have is.
Got a call from William on the South Side. Good morning, William. Go ahead. William, are you there?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep. Go ahead, William.
Oh, great. Thank you for answering my first question. My second question is, with the attack of the universities by the administration, what can university students do in helping to show the value of public radio? Because, in the past, there were a lot of young people that were involved in various movements, the civil rights movement, equal rights, all of those, and they had a voice and they used it. But in today, the context is a little bit different with the help of social media. So how can university students share their voice in a positive, productive way to show the value of the public media that we have? Thank you.
Thanks, William.
Well, that's a great question. And I think one of the challenges that we have in this media environment that is increasingly dominated by, especially for young people, by social media services, TikTok and so on, is making sure that that these nonpartisan, fully researched, fact-based information is available to them in those places. So I think for college students, they can do all the same things that we can do. They can let their Congresspeople know, they can let their friends know that these services are important to them. Increasingly, we reach folks on those services, and they may not even know that they're coming from us, right? We have a service called Jacksonville Today, which is a digital news service. We're operating on most of the social media platforms, and folks may not recognize that those are services that are coming from this organization. So part of it is that old media literacy thing, is try to figure out actually where you're getting your information, and understanding that the information that we're putting out there is maybe a little bit different in form and value than some of the others, and then make your voice heard.
I want to take a call from Christine in Palm Coast. Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, good morning. Pardon me. I asked the public library here to order Red Scare by Clay Ryson. It's Blacklist McCarthyism and the Making of Modern America. And I learned about that book through a program on NPR. It's such a big part of my education, that in the New York Times. So also, I'm going to be taking a 1,200-mile trip, and I don't have a stereo system, so I rely on, when I get close to cities, picking up NPR. And I'm wondering, am I going to be able to do that? I mean, some of these things are waking me up at night. I've been having bad dreams about all this corruption. So I also want to pledge.
Oh, that's nice of you, Christine. This is not actually a pledge drive per se, but David, we can, I guess, always
Sure.
redirect.
If you go to WJCT.org/protect, you'll find an opportunity to donate right there. So in addition to contacting your Congress folks. But I also want to pick up on something that caller said, which is that they learned of something, right? That they chose then to go to their library and find a book or whatever. I can't tell you the number of times that I have heard something on our public radio station and said, I didn't know that. That's interesting. Let me go find out more about that. Mm-hmm. It's such an important trigger to our curiosity, right? It's so valuable for those kinds of moments that we all have with all of the services that we provide. And yeah, that is under threat. I don't want to be a catastrophist about it, but I do want to clearly say that federal funding is the base funding. And the other thing that I think is so important, and why is it different than things like the NEA? Why is it different than some of the other things that you mentioned that are also under threat? One of the reasons it's different is because the federal funding for public media has provided the base funding for the most successful public-private partnership, in my view, in American history. $6 non-federal dollars are raised across the country for every federal dollar that is supplied to public media. When you look at the funding credits for whether it's Molly of Denali or Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood or Martha Speaks or any of the programs that you're watching on PBS, you can see in many cases a corporation for broadcasting credit, but you'll also see other credits, right? And the fact is that money that comes from the corporation for broadcasting is usually the seed money. It's the first money in. It may represent only 10% of the budget that it takes to make that program, but it's what allows the producers of that program or the stations that are producing it to go out into the marketplace and say, you know what, this is going to have a great spot in the schedule. It's supported by Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and it enables it to attract that support. That's what makes the system work. That's why federal funding is so important. It's not that there's not other money in the system, but that 15% is the base.
All right. Well, David McGowan, it is a pleasure to talk to you about this. For people who are interested in supporting public media, you can, of course, go to WJCT.org/
WJCT.org/protect.
Protect. All right. Thank you for being here, David. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, a new report shows Florida leads the nation with the number of police agencies joining forces with ICE. Welcome back. A massive multi-agency immigration crackdown announced this weekend led to the arrest of 800 people over 4 days in Florida alone. That comes as no surprise to my guest, who's been reporting on the surging partnerships between Florida law enforcement agencies and ICE. Joining me to discuss it is Laura Morel, reporter at Mother Jones, and she joins me now by phone. Good morning, Laura.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. You've been reporting on how local agencies have become immigration enforcers, especially in Florida. What have you found?
So, what I found is that since President Trump returned to the White House back in January, he signed an order that basically called on local law enforcement to collaborate more with ICE or with immigration authorities. And after that call, the DeSantis administration, along with Republican lawmakers, passed a number of immigration bills that sort of prompted this increased collaboration in the state between police here and ICE officials. And they do these collaborations through these agreements, as of a couple of weeks ago, according to ICE's own data, these agreements have more than tripled since Trump returned to office, and half of these agreements with law enforcement have been enacted just in the state of Florida between sheriff's offices and police departments here in this state.
And so, why is Florida an outlier? I mean, why are we seeing so much more participation of these agencies and kind of their urgency and willingness to sign up to enforce along with ICE?
Right. Yeah. So that ties back to those immigration bills I mentioned that DeSantis signed a few months ago, and they did a number of things. One of the laws that he signed requires all county jails and sheriff's offices that run those facilities to participate in these agreements, which is technically called the 287G program, and I'm happy to get into that more. So that requires sheriff's offices to do it, but dozens of other Florida law enforcement agencies have also enrolled in the program, even though they're not required to. And there are a couple reasons why that might be happening. One might be a lot of agencies are just worried about retaliation from the DeSantis administration. We saw that a few weeks ago when the state attorney general warned Fort Myers officials that they could lose their positions if they didn't approve one of these agreements with their local police department. And then on top of that, there's also some confusion. There was one bill that was being looked at that would have required all police in the state to engage with ICE, but that bill didn't pass. But it still seems to be causing some confusion among what is required or not required of law enforcement in Florida. And at least one city in Miami-Dade County actually has asked the judge to clarify whether their police department is now required to enroll or not.
And so some question about local law enforcement being required to participate with these enforcement efforts. But you, as you said, all 67 Florida sheriffs are already, required to participate. We're also seeing participation from the Florida Highway Patrol, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Florida State Guard, the Florida Department of Agricultural Law Enforcement, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So broad participation from those other state law enforcement agents. What does this mean? What is this going to mean? What does it mean for people who live in Florida, and particularly for people who are, from somewhere else who are living in Florida?
Right. So a lot of Florida law enforcement officials have talked about how they are prioritizing immigrants who have a criminal record. But the thing that a lot of immigrant advocacy groups point to is that these kinds of agreements basically provide law enforcement wide discretion on who they arrest and who they transfer over to ICE custody. And that raises a lot of concerns. Already, and I think it was 2 weeks ago, we saw the arrest of a U.S. citizen in the Tallahassee area. He was arrested by the Florida Highway Patrol. And then later on, he was able to show documentation to prove that, he was born in the United States. So those are the kinds of situations that I think a lot of folks in the immigrant advocacy space are really concerned about. And I also spoke to a couple of experts who told me that these kinds of laws aren't new. They've been around for a number of years. They're just, happening to be implemented more strongly now. But they could lead to a number of issues, including distrust in law enforcement among immigrant communities, increasing fear among immigrant communities and not wanting to contact law enforcement even when they need some kind of police presence or help. It also affects the economy because if immigrants feel too concerned about showing up to work or patronizing businesses, that also impacts, the economy as well. And it's important to remember the context here. Florida is one of the largest immigrant populations in the country. So these laws affect many families of mixed status where you might have somebody who's a U.S. citizen, but maybe you also have a family member who's here on a green card, or maybe somebody who's waiting for a decision on their immigration case. So it's going to affect so many families across the state of Florida.
Do we know much about, you hear concerns sometimes, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, about racial profiling? Is there any research into that? Is there any evidence that shows that is a concern, a reasonable concern?
Yes, there has been some research into that as well. I mentioned earlier, police having this sort of wide discretion under these immigration enforcement powers. And that's, definitely something that I think groups like the ACLU pointed to a few years ago under the first Trump administration term. That was a concern, and that they had been able to identify some examples of that occurring. So yes, that is another concern, again, with, this increase in discretion for law enforcement.
You were saying that, there's these agreements are called 287G agreements. They have been around for a number of years, including under the Obama administration, the Biden administration. More recently, a great increase in the number of them. But can you sort of break down what they allow for? There's sort of different categories of enforcement.
Right. Yeah. So what we've seen is that the number of agreements sort of ebbs and flows depending on, obviously who's in office and what the priorities are. Under the Biden administration, we didn't see an increase in these agreements. In fact, I think most, if not at the minimum, many of them were just remnants of the Trump administration. And then what we're seeing now is there's a few different models. There's one model where law enforcement have the ability to interrogate people they have arrested and in order to determine their immigration status and then communicate that information over to ICE. There's also another model where law enforcement can serve immigration warrants on people in their custody. And that makes it much easier for them to notify ICE and transfer people over to federal custody. And then I think the model that's causing the most concern allows police, as part of their daily duties, to stop and question people on the street just on the basis of their immigration status and potentially arrest them or have, the ability to arrest them if they so choose. And those are the agreements. Most of those are the ones that are currently in place in Florida. And it's frankly a newer model. And I believe, locally in terms of Jacksonville, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office recently signed up for this particular agreement as well.
Just about 10 seconds left. I mentioned at the top there was a big enforcement crackdown announced just over the weekend. Are you expecting to see more of this given the number of agreements and shared enforcement deals?
Yeah, I think the raid is an indication of what to expect in the coming months and years as ICE and local police continue to collaborate together.
Her name is Laura Morel. Her article in the Current Mother Jones is called Florida is Leading.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One texter call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
More at HeraldHoganLaw.com. AEG presents Kenny G. The contemporary jazz artist will bring his smooth and soulful saxophone melodies to the Florida Theater on Wednesday, May 7th at 8 p.m. Tickets available at floridatheater.com. One Jacks presents the 55th Humanitarian Awards on May 1st. Honorees include Dr. Charles B. McIntosh, Debbie Buckland, Josh Martino, John Payton, and Dr. Johnetta Betch Cole. Celebrate their efforts to bridge divides and unite our community. onejacks.org.
The Jacksonville Music Experience presents Psych Soul Band Ghost Funk Orchestra performing live on the WJCT soundstage on Friday, May 2nd at 7 p.m. Tickets and more information at jacksmusic.org/JME events.
Tariffs, mortgage rates, clashes with the Fed, all making for an unstable economy.
People really feel like the government is so bad that they have to stockpile cash in case the banks implode. You haven't seen something like that since the Great Depression.
I'm Deborah Becker, the On Point Money Ladies, on the state of our current economy and some advice on navigating it. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
In September 1787, 39 delegates signed the United States Constitution in Philadelphia. That document has been debated ever since. Now, with the president pushing the boundaries of executive power, a question looms. Are we in the midst of a constitutional crisis? Our experts weigh in, and we hope you will too, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it's an event that aims to build a healthier, more connected community, plus coffee. Here to tell us about the 7th annual Beaches Wellfest this weekend is Tracy Aiello Marko, physical therapist and the event's founder. Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Mary Malahi, health educator and director of this weekend's planned coffee crawl. Hey, Mary.
Hello, hello. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So first of all, what is a coffee crawl?
That's a very good question. So the coffee crawl is the kickoff event for Wellfest. And what we do is we have different coffee vendors from around Atlantic Beach and Jacksonville that set up these wonderful stations for participants to be able to do this beautiful mile loop through the neighborhoods of Atlantic Beach and then stop and taste coffee and different samples. And we even have like a morning tea vendor. So it's not just exclusively coffee, but big reason for doing this event is one, to expose local businesses and in a fun, connective way, and to just promote movement. It doesn't have to be a race where you're trying to go as hard as you can. Just get out and, walk with your neighbors and friends and sip on some good coffee and start your day off right.
It sounds awesome. I mean, a walk that's a mile might not be long enough by the time you've had all that coffee. You might feel like animated to go do a little bit
It's
more.
true. And a lot of times people do multiple loops. So we just keep the course basically open for an hour so you can loop around as many times as you want. And then this year, doing a plug for Go Ruck, they're actually going to have people be able to take on like weight vests. So if you want to make it a little bit harder, you can put on a weighted vest and walk the loop with that to get a little extra. So we're just
people who don't know Go Ruck. I mean, this is they manufacture kind of like backpacks, and people wear them with weights in them to exercise.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Just having a little something to get that heart rate up more and get that muscular endurance up. So we're always looking at different ways to add to the event each year, and we've got Go Rec this year.
And Tracy, you created Wellfest. Now it's been 7 years. This will be the 7th year.
Yeah.
What inspired you to start it?
I really just felt like we were missing the opportunity to bring local businesses into the community to kind of open those resource doors and make it more available and easily accessible for people to find different resources that they can use for health and wellness. There's a lot of, with social media, like, what do you do? Where do you go? Like, what do you need to be the healthiest version of you? And for me, that's everything from physical health to mental health to environmental health. And we have those resources and we have those local businesses here in Jacksonville and at the beaches. And so for me, I wanted to find a way to bring them to the community and give them the opportunity to market themselves and give the community the opportunity to have exposure to things that maybe they wouldn't normally have.
And you have a background in wellness. This is
I
not
do.
something you're just coming to randomly.
Yes. I am. I've been a physical therapy assistant for years, and I just recently got my doctorate. So I have a doctorate in physical therapy. I also teach yoga. So I've been the volunteer yoga teacher for the city of Atlantic Beach since 2018.
That's excellent. And Mary, you are also a strength conditioning specialist.
Yes.
An athlete yourself. Now, you said you didn't finish an Ironman, but you participated in an Ironman, which is the way more Ironman than most people
I did
do.
I did a half Ironman, so
Okay.
not a full, but I do like to do a lot of different races, especially endurance races. But yeah, background, I'm an exercise physiologist, certified strength and conditioning specialist. I've been working in wellness for a long time, now in corporate wellness. So really like to now work less with the athletes and more just kind of with the employee population, helping them
move and stay healthy and just a bit more of that lifestyle.
Yeah. So we mentioned the coffee crawl, but what else can people expect from this event?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so much. So we have yoga at 10 a.m. sponsored by Embody Yoga. And then we're going to have a moving meditation, which I think is the first time that we've ever done something like this from Still and Flow. And I think it's going to be kind of a fun experience for people for taking that meditation and taking the stigma of, do I need to sit and be still and just to get connected with my mind. So we're going to take that away and make it a moving meditation, which I think is going to be very different.
Is that something where people are like walking or just kind of moving
I
around?
think they're going to be moving around. Honestly, I'm learning too, which is a beautiful thing. Is I learn something new every year that we do this. And then we have live music. So Kalani Rose and the Vibe are going to play for 2 hours. But while all of that's going on, we also have like 35 different sponsors and vendors of local businesses and other nonprofits, because we are a nonprofit. So we have other nonprofits come and set up tables as well. So everything from Alcoholics Anonymous to Here Tomorrow, which is for suicide prevention and awareness. They are our title sponsor for the event. So we have kind of everything set up: acupuncture, behavioral health, Pilates, yoga, everything to come try and just learn.
Oh, wow. So all kinds of wellness-oriented things people can kind of explore.
Yeah, and it's a completely free event. Free, open to everybody. As a nonprofit and as a huge advocate for building a village of health, everything that is Wellfest will always be free and open to the community, because I don't ever want cost to be a barrier to access for things like this.
Where is it being held? And you said the first event is the yoga at 10?
The first event is the coffee crawl.
Okay.
So 8:45.
Oh, wow.
So
Up early.
coffee crawls at 8:45, but it's open for an hour. So, if you don't make it by 8:45, it's open. Yoga starts at 10. It's at Johansson Park in Atlantic Beach. We do partner with the city of Atlantic Beach to make this event as full and as wonderful as it is. So we're very grateful for that. And so Johansson Park.
Well, Tracy, Mary, it is nice to meet both of you. Have a great Wellness Fest. It
Yes,
sounds like a
thank
lot of
you.
fun.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can send
FloridaTPO.com. AEG presents Hauser, the Rebel is Back tour. The Croatian cellist brings his